What's up, everybody? You guys made it. I need to move my camera over just in the nick of crime. This is our last Diddy show like this one. Okay, now this is the last day of arguments. Closing arguments are actually still going on as we speak, but I needed to get this show going because it is Friday. It is the weekend. And Maureen Comey is still talking, doing her rebuttal. And I figured by the time we get to that point in the show, we will have the full, complete thing. Now, with that being said, let me kind of talk to you about what's going on today. Yesterday, we had the prosecution do their part. And I think that prosecution did a phenomenal, probably the best we have seen prosecution do this entire time, right? Probably the best that we have seen them do this entire time. Now, defense was up today, and they have done their best to try to undermine everything that prosecution did yesterday. Now, what's going to happen from here is defense has finished up their closing arguments. Prosecution is currently, as we speak, as I record this, as you guys watch it live, recording for those of you who are watching it later on the replay, prosecution is doing their rebuttal as we speak. So we'll hopefully have the rest of those results as it goes. Now, come Monday, the judge is going to give instructions to the jury, and deliberations will probably start Monday later in the afternoon, possibly Tuesday. Not really sure of that timeline yet, but we're not going to have a verdict by tomorrow. And also, they're predicting that this is not going to be a quick turnaround verdict. You're probably not going to get something instantly. It's probably going to be a few days, possibly even longer, depending on what's going on. Now, I would encourage you that if you're watching this, but you didn't see yesterday's show, go back after this one and watch it, because we get very into what the prosecution did. And I think that a lot of y'all will be very impressed. Now, all of that said, here's what I need you guys to do for me as we kick this thing off. You guys know the drill. If you are watching on YouTube, Insta, Facebook, please hit that follow button. Please hit that subscribe button on YouTube. It is the same. If you are watching on TikTok, same thing. If you are new here, please hit that follow button. Those are things that are free that you guys can do, and tap that screen. The more likes we get out there, the more that TikTok decides to push this out. However, I put a lot of effort into today's show because I knew it was going to be the last. So there are a lot of photos, things like that, some of which you've not seen before, new sketches, some you have seen but maybe missed, whatever. We have a lot of those in today's show. So I would encourage you, if you want to jump over to YouTube, do so. And of course, hit that subscribe, which is the same as a follow button on YouTube. All right. That being said, let's get into it. But before we got into what happened with the defense, let me tell you, you guys know that I like to give you guys these kind of housekeeping items, right? So while Diddy, defense attorney Marc Agnifilo, was pacing the floor in federal court, gearing up to present his closing arguments, trying to convince a jury that this whole thing is overblown, Diddy's own son was announced is releasing new music with none other than Kanye West, or the artist formerly known as Ye, who is now known as Ye Ye. True story. You didn't know that. But yeah, Christian King Combs has dropped a 7-track project today, right in the middle of closing arguments. And one of the songs is called Diddy Free. And the hook says it all. Ain't gonna sleep till we see Diddy free. It's definitely not subtle, right? Kanye actually showed up to the courthouse earlier this month. As you all know, cameras caught him slipping in and out. And now we know why. He was working on this project with Diddy's son, and they timed the release for today. And apparently it's loud, it's bold, and it's happening in real time while the jury sits just a few feet away from the man that they're about to decide on. So just so you guys know, there's a new album out. All right. So moving on, guys. And again, TikTok, we're showing some new pictures. I was supposed to be showing that picture while we were talking about it. See, I'm already messing it up. But nevertheless, it's fine. Prosecution's 5-hour finale has drawn a lot of praise, like we talked about, right? And I'll give you a quick recap in case you missed that. Again, you can watch yesterday's thing to get more in depth. I'm going to summarize this in just a paragraph or so. But basically, the prosecution wrapped their closing argument in this case with a nearly 5-hour presentation. And while it was long, it's already been called very effective. And this is all coming from like outside legal experts and analysts, things like that. Some have weighed in saying that the prosecution managed to do something critical, which is take extremely complicated legal concepts like RICO, like sex trafficking, and translate them into something a jury could actually follow. She acknowledged it dragged in places, it was acknowledged that it dragged in places, especially near the end when prosecutors dove into some of the more tedious elements. But that's what made it work. Apparently, in one of the analyst's words, it was very, very long. And towards the end, especially when they were going through some of the more tedious elements, it did get a little bit more over the top, maybe a little boring. However, it really needed to be that way. The visuals helped anchor the argument, slides, images, timelines, all of it played a role in laying out the government's case in a way that was organized and easy to understand. Now, from here, defense takes the floor. Marc Agnifilo, Diddy's lead defense attorney, is the one who was delivering closing today and was expected to focus heavily on the credibility of the prosecution's witnesses. Basically, what we were told at the beginning of this is that we should expect to see a lot of emphasis on text messages, ones the defense believes show a different picture of what the so-called victims and Diddy's employees were thinking and feeling during that time period. Basically, this was defense's shot to argue that the government didn't meet its burden, that what the prosecution laid out doesn't actually rise to the level of racketeering or trafficking under the law. Now, the next thing we kind of talked about this very briefly at the beginning of this is that it's being predicted that this is not going to be a fast deliberation, y'all. They think, basically, analysts are saying, experts are saying they believe that it's going to take the jury a lot of time to work through this case, and especially when you have the complicated RICO statute that you have to really get into. Now, that tracks with how intense and layered this case has been over the past several weeks. Multiple accusers, very long timelines, complex legal standards, and a mountain of digital evidence. The judge then returned to the bench after all this, now as we're getting started in court, and confirmed what many of us had kind of already expected, that he now believes it is best to wait until Monday to give the jury their instructions. That means no deliberations will be starting today, and likely not until Tuesday morning once Agnifilo finishes and the government delivers its rebuttal. Court will likely recess for the weekend, and Monday morning, the judge will formally charge the jury, explaining the law that they must follow as they begin deliberating behind closed doors. So when we do that show tomorrow, on Monday, it's going to be much shorter. It's not going to be anything like this. In fact, it might be too short to even do a full show and might just come in the form of a short or a reel or a TikTok video. So just keep that in mind. We're going to see what we have. If I can do it in a long form, I absolutely will. Now, what happens next? So here's where we're at today, starting at the beginning of today. The defense gave its final word. Prosecution gets one last rebuttal. Then it's in the jury's hands. They won't begin deliberating until after they've been charged on Monday, meaning this long-awaited verdict is not going to come quickly. Now, it's time for Marc Agnifilo to start his part. He opened the defense's closing by argument by telling the jury that they were witnessing two very different versions of this case. One version, he said, was based on real evidence, the text messages, the videos, and the sworn testimony of witnesses. The other, he argued, was manufactured by the prosecution. The second trial is the trial as told by the mouths of the prosecutors. That, he said, quote, "That I submit to you is the false trial. That is the exaggerated trial. That is not the real trial." He leaned into the idea that the government distorted what this case was truly about. According to Agnifilo, the first version, the one that's grounded in evidence, isn't about trafficking or conspiracy, that it's only about lifestyle. You want to call it swingers, whatever you want to call it, that's what it is. That's what the evidence shows. He then shifted to defending Combs' character, telling the jury that they need to consider what had been said about Combs by people who actually worked for him. Let's talk for a second about what the evidence shows about Sean Combs. Sean Combs has become something that is very, very hard to be. Very hard to be. He is a self-made, successful Black entrepreneur. He emphasized that Combs has built multiple businesses that were not only sophisticated, but had stood the test of time. He reminded the jury that even though some former employees testified to having issues with Combs, many still cared about him deeply. Did they always like him? No way. Let's not even go there. But they loved him. They didn't want to leave him. Then he continued, positioning Combs as in his business operations, he pushed dismissing the idea that Combs' business operations amounted to a racketeering enterprise. He told the jury that no one who testified ever claimed to be part of an enterprise or criminal conspiracy. He said, quote, "You didn't hear that from the evidence. You didn't hear that from a witness." Agnifilo said the defense position is clear. Sorry, I'm sure I've lost my train of thought here. There we go. The defense's position is the prosecution that is applying to RICO in a way that doesn't reflect what the actual evidence supports. He also went on to say that the government has targeted Diddy as just a DEI defendant, somebody to go after because he falls under the DEI category. All right. Now, he then turned sarcastic when he recounted the. I'm losing my train of thought, guys, today on this. Losing my train of thought. Here we go. Bam. That's where I wanted to be. There's a lot of notes that I have here, so I have to kind of talk and go off those. I mean, there's a lot today, more than I think any other day. Okay, so Agnifilo also pointed out the fact that 6 of Combs' 7 children were in the courtroom along with Combs' mother as he attempted to reinforce the idea that Combs is a man of character and responsibility, saying the man takes care of people. He used Combs' relationship with Jane, one of the accusers testifying earlier in this trial, as an example. Agnifilo told the jury that Combs has continued to financially support her, saying, I hope she's having a nice day, but you know where she's doing it, in a house that he's paying for. Then he turned sarcastic as he recounted the high-profile 2024 raids on his properties in Los Angeles and Miami. He downplayed the government's findings and criticized their theatrical nature of the searches. Boxes of Astroglide taken off the streets. Woo, I feel better already. Artificial lubricant, not for me. Streets of America are safe with the Astroglide. And they got the baby oil. They found the personal use of substances. They did it. It's all worth it. Thank goodness for the special response team. They found the Astroglide. They found the baby oil. They found like 5 Valium pills. Way to go, fellas. Then he went on to tell the jury that this isn't about justice, that this is about money. He claimed that none of the women accused Combs of abuse contacted law enforcement. They did reach out to civil attorneys, however. He said, quote, they do call somebody, though. They called civil plaintiff lawyers. That's who they call. This isn't about a crime, that it's about money. He specifically singled out Cassie Ventura's lawsuit, saying Cassie Ventura sued Sean Combs for $30 million because Sean Combs has $30 million. Agnifilo tied the current federal investigation directly to that lawsuit. This very investigation came out of that civil case. No $30 million, no lawsuit. No $30 million, no lawsuit, no criminal case. That's why we're here. We're here because of money. He then made it clear to the jury that Sean Combs isn't denying domestic violence towards Cassie Ventura. He said, we own the domestic violence, taking accountability for it. We did it. He repeated it more than once. He told jurors that they weren't running from what Ventura or Jane had said. What Jane had said about being abused. I don't think we asked her a single question to challenge anything she said about being hit, being kicked, or being dragged. And that was referring to Cassie's cross-examination. He also pointed out to Cassie's own words in a social media post following the CNN release of the surveillance video, where Diddy was seen assaulting her in that Intercontinental Hotel hallway in California, saying, quote, she was very precise and very clear about what the issue was for her. The issue for her was, who was there, domestic violence is the issue. When she says domestic violence is the issue, I'm asking you to believe her. Agnifilo told the jury that Ventura and Combs were not participants in a racketeering enterprise. According to the defense, their relationship was built on love, not coercion, not on criminal activity. It's a real relationship, and they were in love. Cassie's no joke, and that's why he loved her. She matched him. She was like him. He acknowledged the abuse, framed the broader relationship as something passionate and consensual, calling it a great modern love story. He told the jury that they could cry at the text messages Combs and Ventura exchanged. He emphasized that Ventura eventually made a decision to leave that relationship in 2018 and did so freely, saying she was always free to leave. She chose to stay because she was in love with him. Agnifilo then addressed their sex lives head on. She's a woman who actually likes sex. Good for her. She's beautiful. She should. She's intense. She's unafraid. He told jurors that their sexual relationship was mutual and passionate, that they were their best selves when it came to sex. They fought when it came to other women. Out of the scores of text messages that were submitted as evidence, you won't find one where she's like, I didn't like the sex. I'm not attracted to you. I don't like our sex life. It's just not for me. He said that they were well matched sexually and suggested, again, that it was part of a consensual lifestyle. Again, I guess you could call it swingers. I guess you could call it a lifestyle. Defense then, sorry, I lost my train of thought there. Defense then turns, there we go. Starts to push back against the prosecution's argument that Ventura lived in fear of Combs. He brought up testimony from Kid Cudi, who confirmed that Ventura had been secretly communicating with him. She played him good too. She played them both, is what Agnifilo said to the jury. He pointed to the burner phone that Ventura used to stay in touch with Kid Cudi and said that she was actively lying to both men. She lied to him for a long time, over and over and over, as she had another relationship with another singer-songwriter right under his nose. She's not afraid of him. He then labeled her a gangster, framing her as as calculated in control, not scared and trapped. From there, he turns his focus onto Capricorn Clark. If you guys remember, Capricorn was one of his assistants, right? And the two separate kidnapping allegations she made against Sean Combs, starting with the 2004 incident where she testified that she was, kidnapped and held for 5 days of lie detector testing after some of Combs' jewelry went missing. Agnifilo dismissed her account outright, calling Clark a little out there, and accused prosecutors of stretching the story into something that it never was. He said Clark's own testimony revealed more about her personal motives than any actual crime. She told the jury that she wanted her life back, but what she really wanted was to be back in Combs' orbit, the world Sean Combs created and is at the center of. That's the life she wants back. He pointed out that even after her alleged mistreatment, Clark reached out to Combs again in the years that followed, asking him for work. He claimed that she had a crush on him and wanted their friendship to become something more, suggesting that she wasn't afraid of him, that she was just obsessed. As for the lie detector testing, Agnifilo openly mocked the idea that this amounted to kidnapping. He recalled Clark's story about being threatened by a man 5 times with who told her that she'd be thrown in the East River if she failed. But then he reminded jurors that Clark went home every night, each day, after hours of testing. Clark said one of Combs' security guards drove her home. You're about as kidnapped as she was kidnapped. He acknowledged the experience was likely disturbing. It's unsettling. That's the whole reason investigators use it. It's unsettling. I have no doubt that she was unsettled, but she was not kidnapped. He then told the jury to think about what was happening in Combs' life at the time. He's starring on Broadway, referencing his role in A Raisin in the Sun. He's involved in the middle of a very significant voter drive campaign called Vote or Die. He's running all these companies. Then came the punchline. Do you think he's waiting on the edge of his seat? That's how lie detector testing. How's that lie detector test coming back? I can't wait to see if she passes. He couldn't care less. He had nothing to do with it. Agnifilo then addressed Clark's second kidnapping claim, this one from December of 2011, when she alleged that Combs showed up at her home with a firearm and forced her to come with him to Kid Cudi's house. Clark testified that she remained in the vehicle when Combs entered the house, but that he had brought her there after learning Cudi and Cassie were dating. Agnifilo dismissed the idea that any force of threat was involved, saying, quote, she was probably so honored that he finally came to her house that if he asked her to take a trip to the moon, she'd go, and he knows that. He doesn't need a firearm. He told the jury that Kid Cudi, who received a call from Clark that day, didn't mention a firearm in his testimony. Had Capricorn said gun, Cudi would have remembered gun. You're not going to forget that word. It's one of the fear words in our language. Agnifilo said that that's what Agnifilo said. He also pointed out that the responding police officer didn't hear anything about a firearm either and wrote the incident up as trespass, not kidnapping. Agnifilo's message to the jury was that Clark was rewriting history and inserting fear into a narrative that didn't originally exist. Then, the follow-up, we turn to an incident that happened a few weeks later, right? I got you guys a different picture of this vehicle because we've seen the same one a lot, right? By the way, real quick side note, because we're getting pretty into this. If you are coming in late on Insta, YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, this is on the Sean Diddy Combs playlist on YouTube on my channel. You can go back to the beginning of it and watch it. And if you are on TikTok, you can't see any of the photos. You would have to jump over to YouTube to do that. And regardless of where you are watching this, please, or where you go to watch it, if you go to YouTube, please hit that follow button as we're really trying to grow those platforms, all of them. So please consider that. Now, like I said, he turned to another incident that occurred weeks later, which is the firebombing of Kid Cudi's Porsche in January of 2012. Clark had testified that Combs was behind the attack. Kid Cudi told the jury that he suspected Combs after his car was destroyed with a Molotov cocktail, but Agnifilo told the jury that suspicion wasn't the same as proof. He acknowledged that Combs had shown up to Cudi's house that day and the Escalade was on the scene was tied to one of Combs' companies, but none of that, he said, meant Combs was responsible for what happened later. Agnifilo said the allegations didn't match Combs' personality or history, saying that he's a fighter. He would have looked for a good old-fashioned fist fight. He's not going to blow up his car. He called the arson a coward's way out and said that that wasn't Combs' style. He also ripped into the government's handling of the investigation, calling it sloppy and incomplete. The arson investigator didn't know what happened to fingerprint evidence that was supposedly recovered from the scene. There was no link between Combs and the Molotov cocktail. And in fact, Agnifilo said the partial DNA profile from the scene was consistent with a woman, not Combs or anyone within his circle. That there is no evidence that he had anything to do with the Porsche. Now, let me give you an idea as to the vibe in the courtroom at this point from Diddy and from the defense, right? Because this is very tense. This is very high strung, and it's a lot to take in, right? So, as Agnifilo delivered his closing, the courtroom itself told its own story. He was pacing back and forth in front of the jury box, drifting away from the microphone, making parts of his presentation difficult to hear. His voice would rise and fall depending on where he was in the room, his energy frenetic, almost performative, and at times it seemed like he was playing directly to the jury, working to draw their eyes away from the government's narrative and onto his. At the defense table, Sean Combs looked anything but composed, which is the first time we've seen him not really composed today. He was visibly fidgety, shaking his legs, tapping his foot against the floor under the table, and constantly shifting with his hands. That nervous energy didn't extend to his face, though. His expression remained frozen, stoic, and at one point he passed a note quietly to one of his attorneys, never breaking from the outward stillness above the neck. As across the aisle, Assistant U.S. Attorney Maureen Comey was visibly unimpressed. She rolled her eyes more than once and kept a subtle smirk throughout Agnifilo's closing, at times clearly reacting to his sarcasm and tone. Even within the defense team, the strain was showing. Attorney Xavier Donaldson had his head in his hand at one point, and which is the kind of gesture that reads either as frustration, exhaustion, or resignation, right? So that's kind of where things are at this point if in the defense's closing arguments. Moving on, Marc Agnifilo continued his closing argument. He turned to the incident at the Intercontinental Hotel in Los Angeles, which is the same night in March 2016, where Diddy assaulted Cassie in a hallway and then attacked an attack later caught on surveillance and published by CNN last year in 2024. The jury had already heard testimony from multiple hotel staff members who claimed Combs tried to pay them off in an immediate aftermath. But Agnifilo told the jury what happened that night didn't meet the legal definition of bribery, and it wasn't part of any conspiracy to obstruct justice. He framed the payments not as a cover-up, but as a desperate effort to contain a public relations nightmare. He said this was about preventing bad publicity. He insisted there was no law enforcement presence at the hotel, and that the police were nowhere near the situation when Combs offered money. There was no investigation underway. There were no police involved. And he's pointed out that Cassie herself didn't want the police called that night. Law enforcement didn't become involved until hours later, and not at the hotel, but at an apartment where officers responded only after Combs showed up and began banging on the door. The jury had already heard damning testimony from Eddie Garcia, who was the security guard at the Intercontinental, who said that Combs handed him $100,000 in cash to obtain the surveillance footage of the assault. Israel Flores, another hotel employee, testified that Combs offered him a stack of cash following the altercation. But Agnifilo argued that the payments didn't amount to criminal bribe because Combs wasn't trying to influence a government official or obstruct a legal proceeding. He's calling her and she's freezing him out, as she should. And he's just trying to get her attention. He told them that Combs was scrambling to manage fallout, not commit bribery, that Combs' state of mind wasn't criminal. It was chaotic, emotional, maybe even reckless, but not unlawful under the relevant statutes. He emphasized that offering money in a private setting in the absence of any police inquiry does not rise to the level of corruption the government is trying to allege. From there, he shifted to another key moment that the government has built its case around, which is witness tampering. Specifically, the allegation that Combs and his security chief, D-Rock, tried to interfere with the testimony of Mia, who you all know who Mia is, because he was the former assistant. Mia had taken the stand earlier in the trial and described in harrowing detail multiple instances of physical, emotional, and sexual abuse at the hands of Sean Diddy Combs. And prosecutors claimed that after the federal investigation launched, she became the target of improper outreach designed to manipulate her. But Agnifilo tried to neutralize that claim. He brought the jury back to the text exchange that they had already seen between Mia and D-Rock. In the conversation, Mia tells D-Rock that she's out of money. D-Rock replies that by offering to help her if she needs anything. According to Agnifilo, that offer wasn't a bribe. It was a human moment between two people who had known each other a long time. saying that is not witness tampering, that's someone offering to help someone else who is in need. Agnifilo did not mention the other context, the repeated efforts by both D-Rock and Combs to reach out to Mia during the height of the federal probe. He avoided addressing why that contact continued once it became clear she was cooperating with law enforcement. Instead, he kept the focus on that one exchange, trying to paint it as innocent and devoid of any type of coercion. The prosecution had argued that the money was a clear attempt to buy silence, keep Mia from testifying about what she knew, but the defense tried to spin it as basic decency, insisting that the narrative prosecutors were pushing was inflated and didn't reflect what the text actually said. Agnifilo didn't dispute the fact that D-Rock made the offer, only the motive behind it. And in the middle of all of this, the pacing, the quotes, the timeline, the jury had to reconcile two versions of events again. The version the government says reveals a long-standing pattern of power, fear, and manipulation, and the one Agnifilo keeps repeating, of a flawed man who didn't always behave well, but didn't cross the line into organized crime. Now, let me take a sip, because this is a lot, guys. We have a lot going on here. So, I've got a new photo to change real quick. All right, there we go. Now, at this point, the jury got a break, and the defense got in trouble. So, when they got a break, the tone in the courtroom shifted sharply as Maureen Comey raised objections to several claims made by Marc Agnifilo during his closing statement. She stood and asked the judge to issue curative instructions to the jury, essentially asking the judge to correct what she described as misleading and improper arguments made by the defense. Comey pointed to three specific issues. First, she said Agnifilo improperly invited the jury to second-guess the government's charging decisions, specifically questioning why certain acts were charged as racketeering predicates. Second, she said Agnifilo had mischaracterized the Intercontinental Hotel surveillance video, calling it a misdemeanor assault when it had not been charged as such. And third, she said the defense had repeatedly implied that Combs was formally charged with crimes like arson and kidnapping, when in fact, those acts were listed only as predicate offenses under the broader racketeering count, not standalone charges. Judge Subramanian agreed with the government's concerns. He called Agnifilo's arguments grossly improper, particularly the part where the defense urged the jury to weigh in on the prosecution's charging strategy. The judge said he would give the jury a curative instruction when they returned from break, explicitly telling them to disregard. Now, when the jury returned to the courtroom, Judge Subramanian addressed them directly. He didn't name Agnifilo or single out specific statements, but the meaning was very clear. There was a suggestion in the defense's closings that you should consider prosecutors' charging decisions, but the judge told the panel it would be improper for you to consider such matters in your deliberations, and you should disregard those comments. But here's the thing about disregarded comments. They've already been said, and they're already in the minds of those jurors. He reminded them that only the court has the authority to instruct them on the law, not the attorneys. It was a subtle but pointed reset, a reminder that even in the chaos of closing arguments, the legal boundaries still matter. The jury would be expected to base their decision on the evidence and the law, not on speculation about why the government chose certain charges or certain language. So that's what happened during their brief break. So from there, jury is reseated. They're back from break, and the judge's and they just finished listening to the judge's sharp reminder about the limits of closing argument. So then Marc Agnifilo turned attention back to Mia, who, in my opinion, is one of the most devastating witnesses of this entire trial. Remember, Mia accused Sean Combs of forced, there's certain words I'll try to say on TikTok somewhere, but forced, and then forced oral. And she described the incidents of control, violence, and psychological manipulation that spanned years of employment. But according to Agnifilo, that story, too, was false. He told the jury that Mia had shown up to court with a false persona and said that the bubbly, smiling version of her seen in a birthday video presented earlier in the trial was the real Mia, not the one who sat on the witness stand and detailed years of abuse. This was not unwanted sexual contact. The defense positioned Combs and Mia as two consenting adults who were involved in a secret, mutually agreed upon sexual relationship. To back that up, Agnifilo pointed to a text message jurors had already seen where Combs threatened to tell Cassie Ventura, his then girlfriend, about this relationship with Mia. Cassie doesn't know about it, and Mia doesn't want Cassie to know about it. His argument was that someone trying to hide a consensual affair makes perfect sense, but someone threatened to expose a forced event as leverage, that's not how predators operate. Why would he use it as a threat if he knew he did something criminal? He then pivoted to tone, not the tone of Mia's testimony, but the tone of her past relationship with Combs. As documented in social media post texts and artifacts of their working relationship, he showed the jury a scrapbook Mia created for his 45th birthday. This is an act of love, Agnifilo said, not manipulation, not survival. It's love. He showed them a group photo of Mia that Mia had posted, one that included Combs's inner circle with Christina Coram, several members of his security team, and Mia smiling in the center, saying, think of a word or phrase that comes to mind. Joy, family, home, belonging. He then paused. Racketeering enterprise? This is your racketeering enterprise, folks. He reminded jurors that Mia worked for Combs from 2009 to 2017, a long stretch that overlapped with Cassie's relationship with him. 2 women, 2 narratives, 1 defense. That neither was ever trapped, manipulated, or coerced, that both were making adult choices in complex, messy, high-stakes relationships with a very powerful man. He then attacked one of the core pillars of the RICO conspiracy charge. The government's claim that Diddy and his associates conspired to distribute or possess with intent to distribute controlled substances. According to Agnifilo, that allegation was detached from reality and from the evidence the jury had actually seen, saying there's no doubt that he had personal use substances. He obviously has a substance problem. But that, he argued, doesn't make him a trafficker. He told the jury that, yes, assistants may have picked up substances for him. Yes, he used them, but that's not the same as running an operation or using his business to move product. The purpose of these businesses and enterprises has nothing to do with getting him substances. Agnifilo then framed Combs's usage as a shared indulgence, something he did with his romantic partners, not something he used to control them. These are things that he did with his girlfriend. They did them together. He referenced Cassie and Jane, another woman who testified. Oh, sorry. Don't do that. Jane. That's okay. There we go. I'm repeating that. And said that there was no suggestion that Combs was pushing substances onto them or distributing anything to others. There's no indication that he's selling it to Cassie or Jane or somehow move the substances or distribute the substances. He made it very clear. Combs may have been reckless, even addicted, but that did not make him a criminal under federal substance statutes. The government, he argued, was stretching Combs's bad behavior into something far more sinister and, as he said, unsupported. So, again, very intense, guys. Very intense. Then came the freakoffs, one of the most explosive and unsettling components of this entire case, especially the prosecutions, and one of the most hotly contested. The term, which was coined by the accusers themselves, described orchestrated encounters arranged by Combs, usually involving Cassie and other male entertainers, with Combs present and sometimes filming or giving direction. The government called them exploitive, coercive, organized sexual abuse. But Agnifilo told the jury that they were something else entirely, a chosen lifestyle between 2 consenting adults. It's his girlfriend. I suppose you could traffic your girlfriend if you sell her into prostitution, but there's no suggestion that he's making any money off of this. He said that Ventura and Combs were swingers, avowedly swingers, and this was simply how they lived. He told jurors the evidence was overwhelming that Ventura participated willingly, and to drive it home, he posted a hypothetical. If your partner likes a certain act and you don't, but you do it because it makes them happy, does that mean that you were coerced? Do you still not want to do it? Where does that land on the I want to do it, I don't want to do it spectrum? He turned Ventura into a symbol of freedom, not victimhood. She's ready to go, and God bless her. She is. She's beautiful. She's a beautiful, sexy woman, and that's what she deserves to be if that's what she wants to be. And that's what she wants to be. Agnifilo also took aim at one of the government's final points in its closing, that not all of the freakoffs were consensual. His response was, how's he supposed to know? He said there was nothing in the messages between Ventura and Combs that would have made him think she wasn't a willing participant. He read from the explicit text Ventura had sent, text that referenced freakoffs directly. There was nothing that would say to him that this was against her will. The prosecution had painted a picture of a man who created an environment of manipulation, coercion, and abuse. But Agnifilo tried to flip that on its head, arguing that what the government called trafficking was just a deeply unconventional sex life between adults who chose it, not victims, not witnesses to a crime, just people, flawed, messy, sexual, and human. And then as his closing argument continued, he returned to the March 2016 incident at the Intercontinental Hotel, And about the footage, which had been widely circulated, he told the jury that that incident didn't happen in isolation and that the messages leading up to it showed Combs and Ventura workshopping a freak-off together. He argued that lead up painted a different picture of their dynamic, one of collaboration, not of control. He acknowledged to the jury that parts of the surveillance video were terrible, especially the moment showing Combs' physical violence towards Cassie. But in court, Agnifilo deliberately skipped over those parts. He instead focused on other sections of the footage, the ones that, according to him, showed Ventura returning to the hotel room with Combs and a security officer. If this room was such a terrifying place, why did she go back in? This room was not a scary place. He told the jury that what they were seeing wasn't evidence of trafficking, coercion, or ongoing abuse, but a fight between two people involved in a deeply complex relationship. He also framed Combs' pursuit of Ventura in the video as being about a cell phone, not an attempt to harm her. The argument wasn't that the assault didn't happen, but that the incident, while ugly, didn't prove the existence of a criminal enterprise, that it wasn't racketeering, it wasn't trafficking, it was a toxic fight between a powerful man and a woman he was obsessed with, and one who had chosen to stay in the relationship for years. From there, he talks about another major allegation made against Ventura. And what we're talking about is that Combs forced himself on her in 2018. He told the jury bluntly that Combs was never charged with that, and therefore the jury didn't have to evaluate it as part of their deliberations. But he also made it clear that he couldn't let the accusation sit unchallenged. I can't let you think that there was a forced encounter, except he used the real word, 4 letters that starts with the letter R. He told the jury that Ventura's story about the alleged forced encounter had changed. She initially told investigators and filed in her 2023 civil lawsuit that the forced encounter occurred in September of 2018, but when she testified on the stand, she said it happened in August. Agnifilo told the jury that the timeline change was strategic, not a clarification, but a correction to get around damaging evidence. He reminded the jury that after the date Ventura originally claimed this happened, September, that she sent a text message to Combs. In it, she wrote, "I had a lot of fun with you. Thanks for the night. I told myself I didn't want anything to happen, and I'm not tripping on it. I know you aren't either." Agnifilo said that text made it impossible to claim a forced encounter had occurred on that night. So because of that, Ventura changed the date to August. Agnifilo then pushed a theory that the prosecution never touched, that Ventura lied about being forced because she was caught. He told the jury that Ventura's now husband, who she was then dating at the time, FaceTimed her in the middle of the night while she was with Combs. When he found out, Ventura scrambled to explain she lies and she says that she was forced. The suggestion that Ventura made up the assault to protect her relationship with another man, basically what the suggestion is. He also addressed a separate message that the prosecutors had cited as an admission of guilt. Combs had texted Ventura after the alleged August incident saying, "I know I look bad to you. I could tell I didn't turn you on yesterday. I fell off, but I'm about to get my shit together." Prosecutor said this was evidence that Combs knew what he did. Agnifilo told the jury that it was just the opposite, that this wasn't an admission, but a reflection of insecurity and not guilt. This is a man who thinks he didn't turn her on. That's not admission of a forced encounter. That's a man who thinks he's losing her. Finally, Agnifilo pointed out what came next, that Ventura had testified that she later had consensual sex with Combs in October, just weeks after this alleged forced encounter. So if there really was a forced encounter, she would not have gone back and then consented later. So there was no forced encounter. He didn't just deny the assault, he reframed Ventura's entire testimony as a carefully controlled narrative designed to hide infidelity, to protect her public image, and strengthen a civil lawsuit that had already led to a multi-million-dollar settlement. To Agnifilo, that accusation wasn't just false, it was calculated. Now, from here, they broke from lunch. Okay? And after breaking from lunch, the courtroom atmosphere shifted once again. Jurors returned to their seats. Marc Agnifilo resumed his closing arguments on behalf of Sean Combs. This time he turns his attention to Cassie Ventura's claim that Combs derailed her music career, an allegation that had lingered underneath the heavier abuse and trafficking testimony throughout the trial. Agnifilo told the jury that there was no truth to the idea that Combs held Ventura back professionally. He pointed to testimony from Capricorn Clark, who told the jury that between 2007 and 2010, Ventura received the lion's share of Bad Boy's resources and attention. According to Clark, Ventura was given significant access to studio time, production support, and promotional backing. Agnifilo said the problem wasn't Combs, it was that Cassie, while talented, wasn't a natural star. Clark had said as much in her testimony. The implication from the defense was clear that she wasn't silenced, she just didn't break through. Now, during the break itself, hold on, I gotta change my photos for you guys. There we go. During the break itself, courtroom observers noticed a noticeable shift in Combs' demeanor. Combs was being described as relaxed, animated, engaged with both his legal team and his family. At times, he was smiling, mimicking and pantomiming Agnifilo's hand gestures as if repeating parts of the argument back. His body language shifted from the tense stillness of the morning to something more familiar, like he was back in control of the room, even if just for a moment. 6 of Combs' 7 children were present in court, along with his mother, Janice. There was a moment where one of Combs' twin daughters passed a note forward through defense counsel. After it was delivered, the girls exchanged a subtle fist bump and smiled back toward their father, a quiet but emotional gesture of encouragement. At one point, one of the twins reached over and rubbed the back of their grandmother, who sat hunched forward, head down, visibly emotional as Agnifilo walked through one of the more sensitive parts of his presentation, which is a very human moment indeed. Later, as Agnifilo pushed back on the claim that Combs had anything to do with the arson of Kid Cudi's Porsche, he argued that Combs would have confronted Cudi directly. Coates noted, Coates is a analyst. I mean to say, an analyst noted that Combs nodded profusely, who was in the courtroom, in agreement with that line, actively signaling to the jury that Agnifilo's description matched his character. Now, remember, he doesn't seem to be getting in trouble today for it, but he did get in trouble in the past for nodding and interacting with the jury. All right. Let's continue on. As the closing continued, Agnifilo returned again to the so-called freakoffs, the term used by Ventura and others to describe the group's encounters allegedly orchestrated by Combs, involving substances, performers, and controlled environments. But this time, the defense didn't focus on whether they were consensual or criminal. Instead, Agnifilo tried to reframe them as something emotionally authentic. He acknowledged that Combs might have threatened to release some of the footage, a point raised repeatedly by the prosecution, but Agnifilo told the jury that those threats weren't real. From time to time, Combs might have said something about sharing the videos, but he never would have actually done it. He wasn't going to release anything. He argued that what the videos actually show is not violence or coercion, but intimacy. The music's nice, the mood seems friendly and easygoing, and everybody's smiling. They're laughing. Forget the sex part. There's real, genuine intimacy and just nice quality to these evenings. He emphasized that the physical barrier in the footage wasn't aggressive, it was raw, maybe unconventional, but it wasn't violent. This isn't exploitation, this is connection. Agnifilo reminded the jury of 2 male participants who had testified being involved in some of these encounters. Both, he said, believed that Ventura wanted to be there. They both thought Cassie was into that. He then tried to downplay the significance of the recordings entirely, saying, I don't think by any stretch of the imagination this is the only man in America making homemade tapes. Once again, defense wasn't denying the behavior. They were redefining it. And as the closing continued, the message became more clear that the line between criminal enterprise and private dysfunction is blurry, and the defense was banking on the jury seeing that line as too unclear to convict. That is what they're going for. Now, real quick, I do want to say this because it's been a moment. People come in and out. If you are coming in late to this, no matter where you're at watching this, you can go back to the beginning of this. It's on YouTube under the Sean Diddy Combs playlist, where all of these are. You missed the prosecutions, the summary of the prosecutions closing yesterday. It too is on that same playlist. And no matter where you're watching, please hit that follow. If you do go to YouTube while you're there, please subscribe/follow as well. We're trying to grow the platform, and you know how it goes. Going back to that, I'm going to mean to change that. There we go. From there, he turned to Jane, though, who is one of the key accusers, as you guys know. She dated him from 2021 to 2024 and testified. She testified under a pseudonym. But Agnifilo said that she wasn't a victim of trafficking, that she was chasing status, that she loved Sean Combs, but she was focused on what am I getting out of this that the world can see. He told the jury that Jane was posting about trips, clothes, perks, and that her motivations were right there, visible on social media. He said she was used to moving in elite circles, and Combs was just one of the many celebrities she'd been involved with. Agnifilo reminded jurors that they already knew who fathered Jane's child and which rapper she was spotted with in Las Vegas in January 2024. She's comfortable being in that sort of strata. That's just how she moves. He tied it all back to the government's broader claim that Combs used his wealth and power to traffic women through orchestrated sexual encounters like hotel nights and freakoffs. The prosecution had argued that they weren't saying every night fit that pattern. Agnifilo seized on that uncertainty. The government said they're not saying every single hotel night was trafficking. Well, then, which ones were? How Sean Combs supposed to know the difference? He continued pressing the point by returning to Jane's own words. Despite her testimony, Jane spoke about one particular encounter, a night she had previously referred to as a sobriety party. On the stand, she said that she unfortunately agreed to the hotel with Combs that night. Agnifilo read that portion of her testimony aloud and pointed to her exchange with defense attorney Tinny Garagos. Garagos had pressed Jane on whether she regretted that night, and Jane answered that she resented Combs for it. I believe resent and regret lie in the same feelings, she had testified. But Agnifilo leaned in, saying she's regretting that she made a choice, that maybe years later she would have made a different choice, or maybe she wouldn't. Maybe she just regrets it. But he argued that that feeling didn't mean that she was forced. She's agreeing to it. He sees her agreeing to it. She regrets it. She resents him for it. That's all coming later. His message was that regret doesn't equal coercion, and emotional fallout doesn't make an experienced criminal. Defense then shifted their attention to one of the most recent and emotionally charged incidents presented in this trial, the June 18th, 2024 altercation between Sean Combs and Jane. Jane told the court that Combs punched, kicked, dragged her during a violent outburst at her Los Angeles home. The prosecution presented the fight as the final tipping point, evidence that Combs had not changed and that his pattern of abuse was still active, even amid a federal investigation. But Agnifilo told the jury that there was more to the story. He called the entire incident really, really inexplicable. According to him, the violence described by Jane didn't track with the rest of their relationship. There had never been physical violence between them before, and yet that night, Jane allegedly slammed Combs' head into a countertop. She doesn't really give an explanation for doing this. He then showed a photo of Jane that Jane had taken of Combs earlier in that evening, calm, casual, composed, and then contrasted that with the events that unfolded just 30 minutes later. Half an hour later, you're just waging holy war on the guy, slamming someone's face. It doesn't get much more aggressive than that. He suggested that Jane's behavior just came out of nowhere and that the jury should ask why. Agnifilo then pointed out to something that Jane had screamed at Combs during that altercation, calling him a pedophile, despite the fact that the other woman Combs reportedly seeing at the time was an adult. Is she looking to get a rise out of him? The implication was clear. Jane knew exactly what buttons to push, and she may have been trying to provoke a reaction. Agnifilo didn't completely deny that Combs had been violent that night. In fact, he acknowledged it outright. He said, there's obvious physical contact. I'm going to stay true to what we've always said. Sean Combs was guilty of domestic violence. But then he worked to minimize the scope of it, arguing that the evidence, the photos, the videos of Jane taken in the days following the altercation showed injuries consistent with being struck twice, not a sustained beating, not an all-out attack. It looks like he hit her 2 times. That's what the injuries show. But even while acknowledging Combs' violence, Agnifilo suggested the bigger story might have been between what Jane was doing before and the fight after. He told the jury that in June 2024, Jane was already aware that there was a federal investigation underway. And with that in mind, he said she may have had a motive to escalate things. Is she trying to just set him up? He even floated the theory that Jane called over a male entertainer that night on purpose to create a witness or a narrative that could fit into a larger legal strategy. According to Agnifilo, if Jane knew the government was circling, she may have wanted to feed them a final incident, one that painted Combs as the aggressor, even if she had helped to engineer that. Throughout this portion of the closing, Agnifilo walked a fine line, acknowledging some of the violence, but insisting the real story was more complicated and, in the defense's telling, more manipulative. He wasn't denying the bruises, he was denying the context. Then, all right, we got to get to it real quick. There we go. I'm changing my photos. So again, if you guys are on TikTok watching, you guys can't see the photos, but I'm showing a lot of stuff on like sketches and things that happened today and throughout the trial. I'm showing those on YouTube, just so y'all are aware. He then shifted into a more sarcastic tone as he took aim at one of the government's more visually jarring claims, which is the allegation that Sean Combs orchestrated these encounters involving Ventura and Jane with at least 27 different men. Because if you remember yesterday, or you didn't see it yesterday, they showed a slide with 27 different men who were all paid escorts, all allegedly paid or recruited for the purpose of satisfying Combs' fantasies. Prosecutors had shown the jury the photos of all 27, but Agnifilo pointed out that only 2 of those men were actually called to testify, and both had slept with only Ventura, but not Jane. Out of the 27, they gave you 2. He was mocking the scale of the prosecution's claim compared to the evidence they actually produced in court. He emphasized that the government never brought forward any man who had allegedly slept with Jane, despite building much of their racketeering narrative around the idea that Combs orchestrated these sexual transactions for both women. And even the 2 men who did testify, Agnifilo argued, didn't fit the picture prosecutors were trying to paint. Both men told the jury that they weren't prostitutes. They said they didn't cross state lines specifically to meet Ventura or Combs. They admitted that they were paid afterwards, yes, but claimed that the payments weren't arranged in advance. And according to Agnifilo, that matters. He argued that if these weren't pre-arranged sex for pay contracts, then the government's claim of organized trafficking starts to fall apart. He pushed the jury to question how serious the government's case could be if they could only produce 2 men, both of whom denied being workers. That's not criminal enterprise. That's a relationship that went places most relationships don't. He then pivoted to what he described as another crucial misunderstanding by the prosecution, Combs' use of professional escort services. He specifically named Cowboys for Angels, which is an escort agency that jurors had already seen referenced in multiple messages between Combs and a senior employee at the company. Agnifilo didn't deny that Combs had used the service. In fact, he leaned into it, arguing that Combs had every reason to believe it was legal. Why is he supposed to know more than them? If they're in business and they're sending escorts, then that these escort companies have been operating publicly, visibly, and without interference for years. And that why would Combs have any reason to believe that he was stepping into criminal territory? He reminded jurors that the people are allowed to pay for somebody's time, and if 2 adults choose to have sex during that time, the law isn't always black and white. It looks like that's not illegal. He acknowledged that it was a gray area, but said that's exactly why the government shouldn't be treating this as a criminal conspiracy. There are all these companies around the world doing this, and Cowboys for Angels is one of them. He added that the company still appears to be in business today, and that in Combs' mind, that alone was evidence that what he was doing must be at least legal. Then came one of the boldest lines yet. The videos of the freakoffs, that's homemade porn. In every adult movie, I'm assuming the actors get paid to sleep with one another. How is that not prostitution? I don't know, and you don't either. He told the jury that Combs was operating in the same space, that the videos, however explicit, weren't part of some type of ring, that they were just a part of a lifestyle, filmed in private, paid for privately, and watched in private. With each argument, Agnifilo kept circling back to the core theme of his defense, that none of this, not the sex, not the videos, not even the payments, adds up to a criminal enterprise, just bad choices, legal gray zones, and a lot of adult decisions made by people who knew exactly what they were doing. Now, I got to change my picture. Oh, I got to go to a whole new thing with this picture. Okay, there we go. We got a new picture. Then, as he neared the end of his closing argument, he zeroed in on the most foundational charge in the entire case, racketeering conspiracy. And he made what he framed as a simple, irrefutable proof. If this really was a criminal enterprise, where are the co-conspirators? Agnifilo reminded the jury that Sean Combs is the only person indicted on this case. There's no one else sitting at this table. There's no one else on trial. No former employees or enforcers turned state witness. No secret underbosses. No Sammy the Bull to flip. Just Sean Combs. The prosecution had implied that people like Christina Coram, Combs' longtime chief of staff, or D-Rock, his former head of security, were co-conspirators in the sprawling sex trafficking enterprise. But if that were true, why would Cassie, the government star witness, have called them for help the night that Combs assaulted her at the Intercontinental in 2016? If someone's your co-conspirator, you don't call them for rescue. He then dropped a very bold comparison. If John Gotti was at your door, would you call Sammy the Bull for help? The courtroom stiffened with that. That message came through loud and clear. You don't turn to the mob when you're running from the mob. Then Agnifilo pivoted to what he called theatrics. He accused the prosecution of parading out fear, not facts. He specifically called out Homeland Security agent Andre Lemon, who testified about firearms found in Combs' Los Angeles mansion. Agnifilo scoffed at the testimony, saying that the agent didn't even know whether the guns were in a safe or not, just that they were there. So why bring it up? They brought out a big, nasty, scary firearm to show you. And for what purpose? To make you think he's a bad person who has big, scary guns, he accused the prosecution of trying to create fear of Combs, fear of wealth, fear of power. And then came his punchline. At what point do you stop trusting the government? It was clear that Agnifilo was making his final appeal not just to reason, but to something deeper, which is doubt. Doubt in the charges, doubt in the prosecution, doubt in the story that had been painted during the last 6 weeks. He is innocent. He is not a racketeer. He is none of these things. He is innocent. He pointed to Combs, who sat stoically at the defense table. He sits there innocent. Agnifilo told the jury that choosing to acquit would take courage, but that courage is exactly what justice demands. You should feel bold. You should feel the courage that you will need to call this as you see it. And I am asking you to summon that courage and do what needs to be done. And then came the final plea. Return him to his family who have been waiting for him. He suggested the government's pursuit of Combs wasn't based on airtight evidence, but on a reaction to the November 2023 lawsuit filed by Cassie Ventura, a rush to indict, a desire to take down a high-profile figure, a case built backwards, not forwards. And as he wrapped, the courtroom took a breath. The judge called for a 15-minute break, with the prosecution's rebuttal still to come. But for now, at this point, the defense had finished, and every card was on the table. Now, this is when the rebuttal came, and I have to really quick, guys, because I told y'all when we started this, I have to kind of get the last of the things in for the rebuttal because it wasn't done. It wasn't done. And so I need to finish that real quick. It'll take me 1 second to get it crossed over. And then we're going to continue the rest of this. Now, real quick while I'm doing that, what I need you, or what I would like to ask you guys to do is just a couple of reminders. Again, if you are new here, please hit that follow button. Subscribe button on YouTube. We are showing photos on YouTube. And if you came in late, you can always find this at the Sean D. Combs playlist. So, let me try it again, trying to get this back up. All right. And when we talk about this, I do want to put something out here. You know what? All right, taking a moment here. But also while I'm waiting for this to do, basically what I'm doing is I'm trying to change the format of it so that I can kind of go over it with you. And I did not, and just so you know, I did not get a chance to go through this myself as we're doing all of this. There we go. 1 second. But what do you guys think of this so far? Like, what do you guys think of the arguments that defense is making in this particular case? What do you guys think? All right. We'll do this differently. Let me change the photos and let's get back to this now. All right. So, as the juror stepped out for the break, however, in this particular instance, sorry, I got a call while I was doing that. Judge Summary made it clear that Marc Agnifilo had crossed a line. The defense attorney, in his final remarks, had implied that the government went after Sean Combs not because of solid evidence, because of pressure, namely the fallout from Cassie's civil lawsuit. It was a narrative of retaliation, a case fueled by publicity, not proof, but the judge wasn't having it. He told the court, with the jury out of the room, that Agnifilo's suggestion that the government targeted Combs was improper. He said that he would be giving the jury explicit instructions that they are not to consider the government's motives for prosecuting. Charging decisions are not up for jury debate, period. It was a clear reminder that closing arguments were not free-for-alls, even in a high-profile trial like this. Courtroom rules and boundaries still apply. Now, real quick, I just want to say this because I always like to make sure that we acknowledge when things like this, what just happened on YouTube happens. So real quick, I just want to thank you for the support. You're probably in the UK, so thank you for watching from the UK. Now, from here, prosecution's rebuttal begins. Maureen Comey began her rebuttal to the defense's closing arguments by directly attacking the core of their strategy, blaming the victims and painting Sean as misunderstood. This defense just spent a whole lot of energy trying to blame his victims and the U.S. government for his lies, his threats, and for his inexcusable behavior. Tossing up excuse after excuse for his inexcusable behavior, She reminded the jury that this trial was about how in Sean Combs' world, no was never an option. Comey addressed the Mann Act violations, calling out the absurdity of the defense's claim that Combs didn't pay anyone for sex. He flew escorts across the country, watched them sleep while he pleasured himself, and then handed them cash. She ridiculed the defense's suggestion that the transactions weren't connected. It doesn't even pass the laugh test. Common sense alone shows you that when the defendant flew those escorts out, it was not for their scintillating conversation, that it was for sex. She made it clear that this wasn't about what the escorts thought. It was about Combs' intentions and actions, his money for sex, the sexual performances, not time. That is prostitution. She also pointed to the text message in which Combs expressed concerns about undercover cops telling Ventura to make sure none of the escorts were law enforcement and texting an escort, "Are you a cop?" as further evidence that Combs knew that he was breaking the law. Comey then turned to the defense's claim that there couldn't be a criminal enterprise because Combs' companies were legitimate businesses. An enterprise could have lawful and unlawful purposes. She clarified that the government wasn't arguing Combs' companies were illegal in and of themselves, but rather they were used in part to fund and facilitate the illegal activity. She cited how Combs' inner circle, including Christina Coram and D-Rock, played both sides when it came to Cassie Ventura. They remained friendly with Ventura, and she said that it was because that they helped keep her tied to Combs. Comey also addressed Eddie Garcia's testimony about receiving $100,000 from Combs after the 2016 hotel incident. She said that the non-disclosure agreement Garcia signed showed Combs was trying to obstruct justice, particularly because it required Garcia to inform Combs if he was contacted by law enforcement. She emphasized that Combs told Garcia not to make any big purchases with money, a clear sign that he was worried police might trace it. Of course, the police and an investigation were on to Sean Combs' mind, which makes it bribery. She also pushed back on Agnifilo's suggestion that Combs was only afraid of civil lawsuits when he made secretive phone calls after Cassie's lawsuit. Comey reminded the jury that Combs said multiple times on those calls that he couldn't talk on the phone. Plaintiffs' lawyers don't get tap phones. Who taps phones? The feds. What he's doing on those calls is tampering with a witness. Comey shut down the defense's portrayal of freakoffs and hotel nights as consensual sexual preferences. She painted a harrowing picture for the jury, saying being in a dark hotel room, awake for days, covered in oil, wearing 8-inch heels, often with a UTI, sitting in the same position, performing oral for hours, sleeping with people for hours, including with strangers, having unprotected sex with stranger after stranger, a rotation of men for days. He said Ventura had no financial motive to lie on the stand. She had already settled for $30 million and secured public sympathy. Why would she risk it all by perjuring herself at a federal trial? Comey addressed the claims that the accusers were motivated by money. Mia had settled years earlier and never expected further compensation. She asked to testify under a pseudonym for her privacy. You know why she came here? She told you why, because she felt like it was the right thing to do. She described Mia's trauma vividly. She physically shrank when she talked about the sexual assaults, which were the most traumatic moments of her life. Comey also challenged Agnifilo's attack on Jane's credibility. She hasn't filed a lawsuit. Jane doesn't have a financial incentive, but it's to lie in favor of the defendant to help him. Comey reminded the jury that Combs is still paying her rent and legal bills. Comey then continued with her rebuttal by confronting the defense's claim that Jane participated willingly. By 2023, Comey said Jane arranged hotel nights out of obligations, knowing Combs was paying for $10,000 a month rent. That's coercion when she was afraid she'd lose her home if she didn't. Jealousy is not a defense. Sex trafficking. Comey then reminded the jury that Jane testified that she picked which men she'd sleep with as a means of protecting herself, a grim form of control and an abusive setup. He then pushed back hard on the defense's attempt to downplay Cassie's abuse, telling the jury that Sean Diddy Combs' violent control and sexual demands were inseparable. Comey said that Ventura was just 21 when Combs began exerting total control over her life, her music career, her housing, even her car. Over time, the violence became routine, so did the fear. He described how that fear wore Cassie down. So when the defendant told Cassie to set up a freak-off, what choice did she have? She rejected the defense's attempt to separate the abuse from the exploitation, declaring, being a domestic abuser is not a defense to trafficking. If part of the abuse is making your partner participate in commercial acts, you're guilty of trafficking. Comey told the jury that these weren't consensual experiences, that they were setups built entirely for Combs' pleasure, that these are not beautiful evenings. They are the same things over and over. set up for one man's pleasure, for one man's enjoyment. She reminded the jury that witnesses testified Combs physically assaulted Ventura during some of these freakoffs, and pointed to the infamous 2016 Intercontinental Hotel attack as one example where he beat Cassie after a sex party was interrupted. There was no separating the violence from the sex, but make no mistake, the violence that happened away from the hotels and away from the freakoffs was about keeping Cassie obedient and controlling her. Continuing her rebuttal, Maureen Comey made it clear to the jury that they don't need to find every freak-off or hotel night was trafficking. They just need to find one instance, and that is enough to convict Sean Combs on the federal sex trafficking charges he faces. One instance, one. Comey reminded them that the law doesn't require a pattern. It requires proof that at least one act involves sex trafficking. If even one freak-off or hotel night trafficking, that was enough. She explained, under federal law, trafficking doesn't mean someone said no. It means their yes was extracted through force, fraud, or coercion, all of which she argued were present in Combs' relationships for their victim. Comey's message on the jury was direct, that this wasn't about performances or lifestyle. This was about exploitation, and even a single instance of coercion or abuse leading to commercial sex is enough to convict. Now, let me go back to my other notes section here, and we're almost at the end of this, guys, I promise you. Okay. Where did we go? Where did we go on this? Sorry. Where's the new stuff that I gave you? You know, we're going to do it this. I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to do this very differently. I'm going to put them over here. Here we go. All right, this is going to be not my normal format for what we're about to do, because I'm just going to go directly from where I get my notes. All right. So then at that point, Maureen Comey had finished the government's rebuttal of the closing arguments. The judge dismissed the jury for the weekend, and the parties were also finished for the day. So here's what happens next. Okay. So I'm actually starting at the top. Sorry. Starting at the top, guys. Starting at the bottom now. All right, here we go. Again, this is not my normal format. Sorry. Again, I started this episode before this was finished because of the time constraint. So anyways, so Maureen Comey said that any financial benefits gained by Cassie and Jane only served to give Sean Diddy more control over their life. The prosecutor said Ventura and Jane both tried to leave Combs multiple times, but would get sucked back in part because of sharing a trauma bond with him. She referenced the defense's suggestion that they engaged in encounters orchestrated by Combs in order to reap the benefits that came with the lifestyle. Those supposed benefits, the homes, the money, kept them trapped. The defendant did that on purpose. The cost of doing that was just a drop in the bucket. He was more than willing to spend that to trap Cassie and Jane. From there, again, sorry, I'm throwing a little bit different format. From there, she continued on, brought up the testimony of two instances of violence: the March 2016 assault of Cassie, and the June 24 altercation between Diddy and Jane at her home. Both incidents were so far over the line, they have tried desperately to spin them. When violence is paired with unwanted commercial sex, it turns into trafficking. Combs threw Ventura to the ground, stopped her from leaving, and kicked her to remind her that he has the power. Combs took Cassie's phone because he knows she won't leave if he has her phone. He made a calculated decision to stay in the hallway with Ventura once she called security so he can keep control of the situation and prevent security from seeing an escort in the hotel room. We're still going, guys. We're doing it. We're almost there, I promise. He then said a violent 2024 incident involving Jane is the most clear-cut example of trafficking by Sean Combs because it's the culmination of a persistent scheme of coercion. Comey said the defense threw out just about any excuse you can think of to explain the incident away. The defense tries to suggest that Jane is somehow to blame for the night, referencing a portion of their closing argument, which Combs' lawyers described Jane as slamming the music mogul's head against a counter. Let me be very clear here. Nothing Jane did that night justifies the defendant's actions. He detailed the way Combs physically assaulted Jane that night, saying that he had literally beaten her into submission. Jane might have started that fight, but he finished it with vengeance, adding that he might have made her pay. He then made her pay by making her have an interaction with an escort. Sean Combs won that fight, and he made Jane pay by performing with Anton. She has no reason to lie about it. Finally, I think we're there. Sean D. Combs never thought the women he's accused of abusing would have the courage to speak, or that the men who testified at trial would back them up. He was wrong. Prosecutor Maureen Comey, that's how she concluded her rebuttal. For 20 years, the defendant got away with his crimes. That ends in this courtroom. The defendant is not a god. He is a person, and in this courtroom, he stands equal before the law. Overwhelming evidence proves his guilt. It is time to hold him accountable, find him guilty. Now, the prosecution is finished. So what's going to happen is on Monday, the judge will issue his instructions, basically charge them at 9 a.m., and then they can begin deliberating possibly as soon as that. Now, here's the thing about this episode. I wanted to show you guys the jury verdict form. I don't have time to do that. I have to go take my daughter somewhere, but it is on my Instagram with all the stuff laid out if you guys want to see it. That being said, again, please hit that follow button if you don't. Please support my content in that way if you can, whether it's on Insta, TikTok, Facebook, or YouTube. And again, this episode is saved on YouTube if you came in late. That being said, you guys have a great weekend, and we will be back on Monday. Bye, guys.